All right, so in this video, we're going to talk about the Groove Synthesis Third Wave. This is a very exciting synth that debuted about 6 months back. I was fortunate enough to join on the beta team in pre-production, and so I've had a good chance over the past 6 months to really explore all the features of this synth, and it's truly become one of my favorites in my studio. There's three sort of separate synth engines that make it really unique. So first off, it's a modern version of the classic PPG Wave synth from the 1980s. It has three wavetable oscillators that have all of the sort of nuances and peculiarities of how the PPG wave sounded. And they've spent a lot of time really perfecting that sound to make this a modern evolution of the PPG wave. In addition to the PPG wave mode, it also excels as a modern, cutting edge digital wavetable synth with a sample rate of 96 kilohertz, and you can do some very advanced, very modern wavetable synthesis with this. The third area of expertise of this synth is as a hybrid analog subtractive synthesizer. And that's the area that I'm going to focus in on this video. So each of the third wave's three oscillators can run in those PPG wave and modern wavetable modes, but they also can run in any one of several classic analog wave shapes, such as a sawtooth, a pulse or square, a triangle, a sine wave, or a supersaw emulation. And in addition, there's white noise, pink noise, and red noise options. So for each of these three oscillators, you can run them in any one of these analog wave shapes, and that gets mixed then into the filter section. The filter section has two separate filters here. There's a two-pole state variable filter, which is a digital filter. It has low pass, notch, and high pass modes. And then there's a true analog VCF filter here, which is a four-pole resonant low-pass filter. And the filter is the SSI 2140, which if you follow specs, that's the exact same filter that's used in the modern Prophet 5 and Prophet 10 Rev 4 synths. This filter is based on the classic Prophet 5 Rev 1 and Rev 2 filter from back in the days in the late 70s, early 80s. So this filter is one of the most desirable filters for an analog polysynth to have. And the Groove Synthesis Third Wave has 24 of them in here, one for each of the healthy 24 voice polyphony. So this is really an amazing engine, a hybrid engine of digital oscillators going into analog low pass filter here, and then through the rest of the sound engine, including a whole effects engine and stuff. But we're really just going to focus on the sound of this synth as a subtractive synthesizer for building out those classic sort of synthesizer tones. So traditionally, the one knock that most digital oscillator synths and DCO synths, for that matter, get are that they don't have that wonderful, natural, organic character that a VCO synth would have. But by implementing some strategic voice offsets for all the parameters in the oscillator, filter, and envelope sections, modern digital and DCO synths and even some VCO synths can benefit, giving them that classic organic style character. So the topic of vintage voice modeling is something that I've been studying for the past few years. About 4 years ago, I set out, I recorded a bunch of old classic synths like Jupiters, Prophets, OBXs, OBXAs, Memory Moogs, CS80s, and various other classic synths. And what I did is I cataloged them, took hundreds of samples and cataloged the behavior on a per voice basis of what all the oscillators, the filter calibration, and the envelope timings were. And the data that I collected pointed to the fact that all of these classic synthesizers from the 70s and 80s that everyone lusts for that classic vintage sound, they all have stable offsets to various parameters like the fine tuning of the oscillators within each voice and per voice from voice to voice, the low pass filter parameters, the filter and amp envelope timings, and various other aspects of the synth. So, with modern synth topologies like the third wave and other synths that have recently debuted, you can model that vintage voice variance behavior to capture a ton of that organic analog spirit. And shortly after I published my findings on the voice component modeling website, Sequential debuted their vintage knob with the Prophet 5 and several subsequent synths. which does this exact same type of stable curated offsets to various voice parameters. And also, I was asked by Arturia to join the Polybrute beta team, and I helped with their firmware 2.0, helped to curate their new analog accuracy controls for Polybrute. So, upon joining the beta team for the third wave, one of the items that I promised I would do was give a deep analysis of how this sort of vintage voice modeling could be implemented on the third wave. And I went back and forth with Bob and Andrew at Groove Synthesis over several months, and we sort of worked out what the best implementation for this synth is. So, in the latest version of the firmware, which is currently version 1.1b, I believe it is, that has the latest and greatest implementation of this. And I highly recommend anyone who has this synth to download the very latest version of the firmware because it's really dialed in at this point and sounds really great. So, the parameter is currently called circuit drift. It's in the miscellaneous menu. I actually think the terminology of drift is not a good terminology because drift is actually an unwanted artificial type of motion. If you have the oscillators constantly drifting about, that produces a much more artificial motion. That's more like the previous generation of slop and parameter drift algorithms that were available on several synths. But this is, it's called circuit drift, but it gives stable curated offsets to a wide variety of aspects of the synth engine when you dial this up. So let me just bring up here. So this patch I have set up, it's just a traditional subtractive analog type of patch. I've just got three sawtooth oscillators here going into the 2140 analog filter here. And what I'll do is I'm just going to play so you can hear the difference of what this synth sounds like with the vintage voice variances turned on versus without the voice variances. So what I have set here is on the first part here, I've got it with the vintage voice variances on, and the second part, it's the exact same patch design, but with no vintage variances or no circuit drift on. So this is what it sounds like with the voice variances. And this is without. So again, with. And without. So as you can hear there, there's a huge difference in the sound. With the voice variances, you're hearing slight offsets to each oscillator within each given voice and from voice to voice. And all of these offsets have been strategically curated to minimize dissonance within a given voice and differences between consecutive voices. In addition to the small offsets for each oscillator, there's also per voice offsets for low pass filter characteristics like cutoff and resonance. And there are some other parameters that are affected on a per voice basis, like the filter envelope attack, decay, and release timing, and the amp attack, decay, and release. So without the voice variances turned on, it's just a much more static sound, a much more harsh sound, or you could just say a much more technical sound, where when I hit these notes, all of the oscillators are perfectly in tune. The low pass filter is very well tamed from voice to voice, and there's no variances to the envelopes as they are digitally generated. But just by applying this, I've just got about halfway up here. I'm at about 110 or so out of a possible of 254 value for the circuit drift parameter here. It just gives so much organic character to the sound and makes the synth just a monster of a hybrid analog type of synth. For anyone sort of wondering about the third wave, it really is a three-headed beast with the PPG wave style engine, the modern wavetable engine, and it really excels at hybrid analog subtractive synthesis as well for doing all of that sort of classic synth sound design. This synth is extremely deep. The fact that it has 24 voices and analog filters is somewhat unheard of. And it's also a four-part multi-timbral, meaning you can split those 24 voices up with up to four different stacks. You can create some super huge layered type of patches, or binaural or stereophonic type of patches, or you can split up the keyboard, or any combination of splits and stacks. In addition to that, the sound engine is just very deep in general. It's got four envelopes, four LFOs, a very large 16 slot mod matrix, which will be immediately familiar to anyone who owns sequential synths. This synth basically feels like a sequential synth, actually. And the owner and lead developer of the third wave, Bob Coover, is actually a guy who's worked with Sequential over the past decade or so, doing a lot of their DSP on the digital oscillators for like Prophet 12, Pro 3, as well as some other synths. He's also been responsible for a lot of Sequential's DSP related to envelopes and effects as well. So this synth very much has a pedigree or a DNA, sort of a mix of like sequential and classic PPG and modern wavetables. And it's really just a super unique and versatile synth. And I highly recommend it to anyone who's a synth player who can get a hold of it. I mean, right now it's a little hard to get. They're doing limited releases of a second batch right now, but this is truly a unique synth, and I feel like this is going to be a future classic, actually. So yeah, I think that'll do it for this video right now. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the hybrid analog subtractive synthesis and the voice modeling capabilities that this synth now has. There are a couple other additional things that I've mentioned to Bob and team that could even make it even better, such as having free running oscillators, and giving a little bit more options as far as controlling the different vintage variances for different sections of the synth separately. And maybe we'll see some further progression on that as well. Bob and Andrew have been amazing with firmware updates so far. For anyone who's had the synth since beta or since regular release, we've gotten just regular updates with a bunch of new features and functionality. And they've been really great with listening to the customer base, which is awesome. All right, well, I think that'll about do it for this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Have a good one.